Welcome to today's screening of the film From Sea to Shining Sea. I'm your moderator, Katharine Lynch, a professor of English here at Wellesley College and the current holder of the Katharine Lee Bates Endowed Chair. We are so happy to, I hope you're clapping for her, not for me. We are so happy to have you here for this wonderful celebration of Wellesley's birthday. In this event, first we will watch the film and we will hear the Tupelos perform Katharine Lee Bates' famous hymn, America the Beautiful. And then there will be a panel featuring Bates' biographer, Dr. Melinda Ponder, class of 1966, and the filmmaker, John Graaf. And we will also leave some time for audience questions. So, not to waste any more time, on to the film. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our panelists, Dr. Melinda Ponder, Katharine Lee Bates biographer, and filmmaker John Graaf, whose documentary From Sea to Shining Sea you just enjoyed. Dr. Melinda Ponder, class of 1966, and Professor Emerita of English at Pine Manor College, is Katharine Lee Bates' biographer and the foremost expert on her life. John Graaf is a renowned and indefatigable filmmaker, director, and producer of more than 40 documentary films on topics that range from work-life balance to the potato blight, and most recently, the beautiful film that you just saw. Is this on? Good. So let me start by asking you, Melinda, what drew you to make Katharine Lee Bates the subject of your, I don't know if you would consider it your life's work, but your really important biography?
I would consider it my life's work. 30 years of being with Katharine, who was a wonderful companion once I got started working on her life, as you could see from the film. So I had published books on Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I found that Katharine had written introductions to all of his novels that were published in 1906. And I knew, of course, from Wellesley, I recognized the name Katharine Lee Bates, having sung America the Beautiful many times. And I thought, could this be the same Katharine Lee Bates as wrote America the Beautiful? So I thought I'd been looking around for a woman to write my next book on, a little-known woman. And so I thought, well, I'll go out to the Wellesley archives and see what I could find. And I got out to the archives, and here were all of her diaries and letters, those she hadn't burned for her biographer. All of them were there along with the 30 books she had written or edited. So here was everything waiting for me, and that was how I found her and got started. And really, you know, she had two careers. One was at Wellesley as a professor, and the other one was as a professional writer. And she often earned as much money from her writing as she did from Wellesley. So her writing was just so engaging. It was so much fun to read, even in her diaries and her letters, along with her published work. So that started me on a journey. Of course, I didn't know it was going to be 30 years. But luckily for me, as you could see, she loved to travel. She loved to travel from Wellesley at the train station right into Boston all the time. And then she loved to travel to Europe first, to Oxford, but then later on to Egypt and to Spain. And so, of course, as her biographer, I had to go everywhere that she had gone. So it was a wonderful journey for me, too.
Yeah, very few people, I think, realize that Katharine Lee Bates was one of the earliest scholars of American literature, taught the first American literature courses at Wellesley, and wrote one of the first three anthologies of American literature that was really pretty path-breaking as a scholar for her time.
Right, well, she wrote a book that was a textbook to be used by high school teachers and college teachers too, and she wanted a diversity of American writers in there. Walt Whitman was considered way, off the charts, crazy, and she wanted Walt Whitman, also Thoreau, who was seen as very unconventional, and then she wanted the women writers in the country to be included in her book.
That's right.
So it was a big deal.
Yeah, and John, same question for you. What motivated you? What inspired you to turn to Katharine Lee Bates for your film?
Is this on? Okay, great. Well, my career much of it has been doing the stories of people who inspired me, of Americans who saw things they didn't particularly like, but who really believed in the country and who showed the finest form, I think, of patriotism by working to make the country all it could be, the best it could be. And I've done many, many stories like that, and Katharine Lee Bates was one that I've known about for many years, but had not taken on until we finished a film a couple of years ago on the life of Stuart Udall, who was the Secretary of the Interior during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. And when we were done with that, my colleague Larry Cotton said, well, why don't we do the Bates thing? We've talked about that in the past. Maybe this is a good time to do that. We didn't know at that time that we were about to hit the 150th anniversary of Wellesley College, or we knew the 250th anniversary of the country, but we had no idea how timely the film would be. Also, we had no idea how much the events of the day today would in many ways mirror the events of the late 1890s that Katharine Lee Bates was very critical of, as we understand. And I really love stories that surprise people, so I felt that this was one that would do that, because everybody knows this song, but people kind of all think they know what it means and don't necessarily. And it doesn't matter whether they're red, blue, pink, whatever. They all tend to believe that this song is sort of a America First, self-righteous kind of song. And of course, it's anything but. It really is asking us to be the best country that we can be. And so I thought that in itself made the story well worth telling.
That kind of leads into another question that I had, which maybe you have just sort of partly answered. But if Katharine Lee Bates were here today, what messages, what lessons do you think that she would want to offer to the world as it is right now? What lessons do you think we can draw from her song? Melinda?
Well, and I was going to say, I hope everybody heard President Johnson's talk this morning, and thinking about Katharine was walking around on this property, the campus, in that second class that started at Wellesley. So she was here among us, in a sense. And I think she was so engaged in the issues of her time, whether they were on the campus, whether they were in Boston, or whether they were in the country, or then later in the world. And I think that is what it seems to me to be so important about her life for us today, as we look back on it. Even though she was wearing, long dresses and all, she's not really remote from us, that idea of becoming engaged to learn about the issues and then do something, act to do something about them.
I noticed that towards the end of the film, you make the point, John, I think, that from sea to shining sea refers to all the seas of the world. And I think when she maybe first wrote it in Colorado Springs, she was thinking the Atlantic to the Pacific. But her life took a different form that was much more international than maybe she might have anticipated. Was it difficult in the film to include all these different elements in her life, all her travels? How did you deal with the challenge of compressing into 37 minutes a life that was so various and so wide-ranging, as Melinda just said?
Well, the first aspect of that was to read Melinda's marvelous biography, because that gave me a real sense of who Katharine Lee Bates was. And I did some other reading as well, but that was a start. And you should see my copy of that book. I mean, you'd barely be able to read the printing because everything is underlined. So after everything was underlined, then you have to go back and pick out what are we going to use in this, and then you have yellow and everything to do that. But you just have to make, as a filmmaker, choices. And I wanted to tell the parts of her life that I thought might move us the most, might be most relevant to today, because it was already dawning on me rather quickly how relevant her life and her story, and particularly, I think, the story of the Spanish-American War and her response to that, and how the song changed when she saw that experience, how relevant that was today when we are still thinking about, we might take Canada or Panama, Green, whatever. So I just tried to take the aspects of the story that I felt really had an effect on me, with the hope that they would have the same effect on the people who watched the film.
I'd like to
Go
say
ahead.
one
Yeah,
more thing.
please.
So one thing I forgot to say, one of my favorite moments in her letters home from Egypt to her mother was when she sat at a crossroads in Egypt and saw people from all over the world passing by with caravans, and there were Europeans there as tourists, especially Germans, and then she saw the Egyptians, but she saw people from other lands too coming from the east. And then, of course, she loved the donkeys, horses, all the animals that were crossing, and it was a sunset, and she just felt, she was in her right place, I guess I would say. It was a moment where she loved being part of a big world, and I think that's what she has to say to us today, too.
What was the biggest surprise that you experienced in your research into her, Melinda?
Well, I did so much research that the harder part for me, I guess I would say, was that I could have written a book that was twice as long, but I wasn't sure anybody would buy it. So I shortened it. So there was so much more to say, and I guess because there was so much material to quote from, and her own writing was so good. That's the trouble when you're writing about a writer. Her writing was much better than mine, and so you want her voice to come through. So, I still do dream about her every now and then. She speaks to me, and I love having the film with her voice speaking to us too. So I can't think of really a surprise.
Was there a surprise for you, John, that really stands out in your memory from the process of putting the film together or discovering more about the person?
Well, I think there were a lot of them. I was delighted to find that what a funny person what a sense of humor she had, and that comes through a lot of her writings, very little of which we could get here on the screen, but she was, she has this sort of appearance of a very sort of strict school marm, et cetera, but she had a wonderful sense of humor, and I think other things was just how modern many of her thoughts were, and again, how relevant they are to this time right now. And I just can't tell you how much that meant to me. But this isn't in answer to this question, but I really want to thank Wellesley, both for the cooperation that the college gave, the archives and all the people here, but also the wonderful support from many Wellesley grads who helped with their financial contributions and other things make this film possible. Especially I want to mention Lulu Wong, but there were many others who contributed to make this film possible, and without them and without Melinda's connection with them, I don't think this film could have gotten made.
Well, I guess I would, now that I've had a minute to think about a surprise. I think I didn't know all of Wellesley's early history. I knew the name of the Durants, but that part of the story, their vision, they wanted this women's college education was seen as a type of reform, the way that you might think of building a prison as a part of the prison reform movement. Yes, so they were going to give their land, which they had intended to go to their 2 children who each died young. Instead, they gave the land to be used for the purpose. And Henry Durant, I had to be taken, he was about to take over my book because he was so charismatic. And he said, give me the women, they can do the job. And he was what we would call a strong feminist for various reasons. And so that part I didn't know about before. So that was...
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's always inspiring to read about the early faculty members at Wellesley, almost all of whom were women, unlike the other women's colleges that were mostly taught by men. I thought, John, you did a wonderful job of capturing Katharine Lee Bates' sense of humor with that little note on her door saying that no one else would regret her absence from classes. And it's nice for me to know, as somebody wrapping up my own teaching career that still feels nervous when I teach, that she also did.
Oh, I guess I have one more surprise.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It takes a little while to think of these surprises. She mentored the next generation and generations of American writers and American poets, especially. She was a mentor to Robert Frost, and he was a young, handsome man. When she met him, he'd just come back from England, where no one was reading the books he'd published, and she was worried about him, though, on the stage, because she wrote to a friend who was going to be on the stage with him, because she would host him at Wellesley. They would have these huge readings, huge audiences would come to the poetry readings, and she wrote to this friend and said, please, can you help him, because he's so ill at ease on the stage reading his poems. So there were surprises like that.
You come to the question near the end of the film, John, about the movement to make America the Beautiful the national anthem, and how it sometimes gets revived even today, and continues to be subject, as it was during Katharine Lee Bates' lifetime, when there even then was a movement to make it the national anthem. Do you think it ever will be our national anthem? Do you think it should be? Do you think she would have cared?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure she would have been proud were that the fact, although it's not something she would have pushed for, I'm sure, herself. The answer to that second question, should it be? In my view, absolutely, it should be. Will it be? I don't know. Obviously, we'll need some changes in the political philosophy that dominates the country before that happens. But one thing that was interesting to me was the amount of time that Ray Charles, who loved the song and did certainly one of the most notable performances of the song, that the amount of time that he spent, 6 whole years really off and on, lobbying Congress to try to make it the national anthem. And I think it should be. I think it has this very powerful patriotic feeling without the militarism of the Star-Spangled Banner.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, her whole life was about bringing people into community. She herself had been, as a child, in this very wonderful community in Falmouth, so far away from, the mainland. And then when she came to Wellesley, she was in this Mr. Durant's community here, and then she helped create communities, especially with the poetry community in Boston. And I think that film, it's her prayer for the country, in a way, to try to bring the community together or the worldwide community. That theme of community is so important. So I don't know whether I would love to see it, the national anthem too, but I think that's an ideal that I don't think we can let go of.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Melinda, but my reading is that in 1930 there was actually a national poll done in which Americans preferred America the Beautiful over the Star-Spangled Banner by something like a 2-to-1 majority. But the next year, Congress decided to make the Star-Spangled Banner in 1931 the official national anthem, I think largely because there was a lot of anti-military sentiment that had grown out of the First World War, and they were probably suspecting there might be another one, and they wanted to kind of keep people having that in mind. But that was just my reading of what I read. Melinda may have read that differently.
Well, I think there was a woman from Baltimore where the Star-Spangled Banner was written. I think she was the main leading the charge to get Congress to adopt the Star-Spangled Banner.
I think the singers just like to show off with the Star-Spangled Banner. Although you could hear in the film how many different ways there are also of singing America the Beautiful. Well, from my perch as a faculty member in the same English department where Katharine Lee Bates taught, I feel a little, resentful is too strong a word, but a little frustrated by the degree to which the America the Beautiful has taken over our understanding of her life. So that whenever if anybody knows about Katharine Lee Bates, when they hear the name Katharine Lee Bates, they think America the Beautiful. And yet, as both of you show so well, she was much more than just that one song, which she actually wrote pretty early in her career. And she went on, as you've pointed out, to write so many books and to make so many editions and to be a pioneer in many different fields of literature. I don't know. I put that out there. I wonder if you share that frustration, or if there's any way that we passed it. Can we make Katharine Lee Bates something bigger than America the Beautiful? Because she really was.
Well, I'll just say that her life was so multifaceted that when I first started working on her, I really just I thought I would do a book about Katharine as a writer, and not just of America the Beautiful, but of all. She wrote a lot of wonderful fiction. She used her writing, and the film shows the book she wrote about the family on Beacon Hill and the women in the settlement houses. But she wrote a lot of wonderful short stories that showed social issues, and especially had pretty strong women. She wrote a nice essay called The American Heroine, in which she said, yes, that heroine has got to have spunk and not just be pretty. So anyway, that was how my book got started, and then I learned that if anyone was going to buy it, it would need to be organized around, I did decide to organize it around America the Beautiful, the parts of her life. And I do feel that the poem, she would often just be writing a little poem and send it off to a Boston newspaper and get $5 for it. And so she almost never revised anything that she wrote. The Yellow Clover, those sonnets are an exception. So with America the Beautiful, she did revise it. And I think that's a lesson to everyone, how important it is to have a chance to revise whatever we're writing.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to answer your question, really.
It is remarkable that she didn't take royalties for America the Beautiful, because she wasn't rich, she wasn't a wealthy person, and she did write partly in order to support herself and her family, her sister, her mother. So it was a sacrifice that she gave that poem to the nation, and something really to be admired. Yeah, John, did you have a feeling about the centrality?
The only thing I wanted to add was that my hope is that middle school and high school kids in particular will see this film and hear this story. So for that reason, I did tend to focus on her connection, relationship with the events of the day, her reformer qualities and stuff. But you're absolutely right. We could have gone a different way, focused on her scholarship, which was immense, her literary qualities and so forth. But I really want American students to see our history in a little different way, as Longfellow, as Melinda pointed out, that Longfellow wanted to do as well. So that motivated some of the choices that I made. That's also motivated why the film is 37 minutes instead of 60 or 70 minutes, because I wanted it to be able to be used in the classroom especially.
Are there other things that you might have wanted to say about either your biography or about the film that my questions haven't really yet given you the opportunity to say before we open it up to audience questions?
Any other things about the film?
Either or about Katharine Lee Bates.
Well, I hope that wherever you're from or wherever you go back to, that you might encourage your local libraries or schools to get this film so that it can be used. It's available from Bullfrog Films. It's one of the leading media distributors in the country, and they're trying to make it, especially with help from Lulu Wang, make the film as inexpensive as possible so that it can be really, really widely used. So that's important to me, that this be seen. I think more than anything, it's hard now in a time where there are simply so many competing things with TikTok and Instagram and this and that to be able to break through and have something like this, especially this length. But that's my hope.
And it's available on Vimeo, right?
It is available on Vimeo. I don't want to be, I'm always concerned about being a promoter. But
do you want me to say it? It's available on Vimeo. You can rent it or buy it by going there.
Oh,
and Melinda's biography also, I think, is in the bookstore.
I understand. It's supposed to be there. Very exciting to me.
And you said you'd be willing to...
Yes, if anybody has a copy, I'd be glad to autograph it for you in the tent afterwards. And it's available on Amazon. In fact, you can... I know I have a colleague in Australia who has eye problems, and so she told me, she had listened to my whole book, and I hadn't recorded it, and I never had arranged for someone else to record it. I said, what? How did this happen? Well, on Amazon, you can just click. If you're buying the ebook, you can get it read to you. I said, was a woman reading it? Yes. And I said, what was her accent? Australian. So you can access my book many different ways.
So I think maybe we should turn to let members of the audience ask questions. There's somebody with a microphone who... there are microphones up in the front. So if you have any questions for our panelists or any thoughts of your own that you want to contribute to this panel, please don't be shy.
So for my professional career, I was a curator of a visual culture collection, and filmmakers and scholars were always frustrated about trying to find images for things that they couldn't find images of. And I was really taken by the beautiful watercolor sketches. And can you just say a few words about the artist or how that decision was made? I think it's a stunning success from my
Absolutely, I'd be delighted to. Well, when you're making a film about someone who died almost 100 years ago, and really there are no existing photographs except portraits that were done at the time where she's just looking at the camera, but nothing of anything that she was doing. One photo, as you see, of Katharine Coleman teaching in a classroom, but not much else was available. And I thought, how am I going to convey these aspects of her life without anything? And I don't want to just use endless shots of Katharine Lee Bates kind of zooming into her eyes or anything like this, or shots of windows and these kind of things. I want this to be a visual medium. And I originally considered regular animation. And then I thought, well, to do current kind of contemporary animation would take this out of the historical feeling of the show and the grace that the old photographs provide and a sense of history. And that's where the idea came up to use illustrations. And it turned out that the wife of my composer, who I've worked with 40 years, his wife Lisa, had done illustrations for children's books. And I asked her if she might be interested in trying this. And she said, well, I'll certainly give you some examples and see if you like it. And initially she did sketches, and I loved them. And I said, yes, let's do this. But I wanted it to come up to life a little bit more, a little bit brighter, and suggested, well, what do you think about putting watercolors in there to make it that way? And she said, I'd be delighted to. I love to do watercolors. And so that's what we ended up doing. I was thrilled with the results, and other people were. She did a total of, I think, 33 separate images for this. And it's also been suggested that we even start promoting the images themselves for other purposes. But thanks for that question.
Oh, yeah, there are some others.
Congratulations. It's a wonderful film. Thank you for making it, and I look forward to reading the book as well. And it really did come to life, so you achieved the objective with the watercolors. I think as every Wellesley student can attest to, the influence our professors have on us is magical. And I'm wondering if you can share more comments that you might have read in the archives of what students said about Katharine Lee Bates as their professor.
Well, thank you. Yes, I had, when I would come to my own class of 66 reunions, I would also take some time and go to where the oldest class was having their reunion. And so I would arrive, often they were in Munger, and I would ask if anyone had taken a course with Katharine Lee Bates. Now, I will say, these women remembered Katharine Coleman and Vida Scudder as charismatic, and Katharine was not charismatic, but there was a woman I met who had been in one of the final 5 years of her life. She taught her contemporary poetry seminar in her house, the house that's over on Curve Street. And so I went down to talk to her. She was living in Cape Cod, and she had saved the anthology that was the assignment for the students to make that semester of their favorite contemporary poems. And she then could tell me a lot about what it was like to be sitting there in Katharine's house with the collie dog, who always came in at a certain moment because it was time for the desserts. So I did get a feeling from that woman what it was like to be her student. And also, when she wrote several editions of Shakespeare plays. and her book on American literature also in the back had notes for teachers, suggestions, what they could do in the classrooms. And so for the American literature one, she said, have your students bring in whatever they can find that's old in their houses to show, here's what the bed warmer was like, or whatever that they had. So I got a sense of her. One reason she didn't like to teach it in the Wellesley classrooms was that she did not like to lecture. She felt she one summer worked on making her voice stronger, but so the teachers then were expected to stand in the front and lecture, and she didn't like to do that. So today we would call her an interactive teacher.
Oh. There's some correspondence between her and former students, too,
Yes,
in the
thank you.
archives that shows that she kept in touch with
Right,
her students
that's right.
after they graduated.
Right.
Yeah, you've
Hi.
been waiting?
I'm going to return to a couple of your opening remarks. One about having it be our national anthem, and the other about what she might say today. And actually, in terms of cutting through TikTok, the fact that the song is a song with music, that helps get through to people. So I think you should stick with the music, but I think it would be great if Wellesley and everybody else would sing the original words more often, at least as part of every rendition. The words that she wrote, particularly those that she wrote in 1904 when I think that was the year you said the song was published. And I think those words actually show her skills as a writer and her observations about the condition that the country was in and how it could be better. And finally, as to what she would say today, it's time for a woman at the top.
There's a question over here.
So I was really curious in the film, the two things that I think maybe go together a little bit is the mention, I'm over here.
I'm sorry, the light is so...
Yeah, we can't really see very well.
hard to see anything.
Is the sort of change to the need for more social activities at Wellesley and sort of what's in the archives about what that must have meant sort of for her teaching and the students and the community, as well as the piece where she had to, what was it? Had to make her friend apologize in order to appease the trustees out of her interest in preserving the institution. And I just thought that contrast with how strong her words are, and yet that sort of need to sort of play ball with the Gilded Age people, sort of what's in the archives and what's in her writings about any reflections on how she felt about that or dealt with that.
Well, I guess I could answer the first part. When she was in Oxford, that's when the crisis came up about whether the college would hire her. Because when she'd been here, I think as a student, first of all, I think she, it's hard to imagine it, but she was a strong person and she rubbed some people the wrong way. So it took Wellesley a few years to hire her back as a faculty member. But then she refused to sign a declaration that she was a member of a church. That was the issue. The trustees wanted, this came from the Durants, really the beginnings of the college, to feel that the faculty were all signed up church members. And she and other faculty felt that that was a kind of a bribe. I mean, that they didn't want to, they wanted the jobs, but they had their own individual, I guess, feelings about that. And so luckily, Alice Palmer, yeah, let's think, Palmer, Alice Freeman Palmer, who'd been the woman who became president of Wellesley at the age of 26 that Mr. Durant had brought along for that purpose. Alice Freeman was a trustee, and she saw, before this came to a vote for Katharine Lee Bates, that there was a new board member appointed as someone who was a recent graduate. And that changed the balance of power in the voting in the board. I mean, we know how this works, right? And so when it came time and Kathryn refused to sign a form like that, and of course it appalled her mother, widow of a minister, and very ambitious for Kathryn to have this job at Wellesley. But the board came around in the end and hired her and got rid of that requirement. Or they may have, somebody had to say, well, this person is of good character or something, that they did. But they made a change. So I can't remember the second part of your question.
The transition at Wellesley into a little bit more of a girls having fun kind of place.
Well, yes, and that was a concern to her, because in her generation, these girls were the first generation who could go to college. And Mr. Durant wanted Wellesley to be, he called it a female Harvard. And one reason he wanted the campus to be so beautiful, and he renamed the lake, Lake Waban. It had been somebody's pond before then. And he said, the girls will forgive all the work because it's so beautiful here. Well, you know, we know about that too. So this began to change as the next generation came through, and then Wellesley had to compete with co-educational colleges now who might appeal to those same girls who might have been interested in Wellesley. So it was an issue.
John, did you come up across this issue, this question of the changing Wellesley in your?
Well, yes, in the book, what is the name? There's a wonderful story of Wellesley's history, and I'm blanking, having a senior moment.
In Adamless Eden by Patricia.
Yes, Adamless Eden is where there's quite a bit about that discussion and all of that. I wanted to add one little thing about the era in which Bates made that decision that she did not want to do this pledge. This was a time when this sort of thing was being talked about a lot. And we have to understand that in 1892 was the year that the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag was written. It was written in Boston. It was written by Francis Bellamy, who was a Baptist minister and, like Vitus Scudder, a Christian socialist. He was the cousin of Edward Bellamy, who wrote the famous book Looking Backward, a kind of a technological socialist utopia. But what Bellamy was concerned about was the fact that immigrant kids, most of them in those days probably Italian in that area, but these immigrant kids were being abused and taunted and treated very badly in the schools by their American-born peers. And he felt that this was a terrible thing, and he felt that if students together both set a pledge to a country indivisible with liberty and justice for all, and said it over and over every day, that it might stick, that they might see themselves in that way as part of the same single community. And he was very explicit in saying, even though he was a minister, saying, I do not want religion in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I want no mention because I believe in the separation of church and state, and also because I believe I want people of all religions or no religion to give this pledge, to come together as Americans. So it wasn't until 1954, as I'm sure many of you know, that the Under God segment was added to the Pledge of Allegiance. So this discussion about making pledges and the separation of church and state was very much in the air in the Boston area at that time as well.
Yeah, I think it was, for Katharine Lee Bates, I think this tension that the questioner asked about between making peace with an institution and its requirements, but also staying true to your own principles and standing up when you think it's important. I think that was an issue that carried through her whole life. She was not a revolutionary. She was a survivor. She had to survive. She really needed the job. She had dependents. And she also just saw things from a lot of different points of view. So she wasn't an ideologue in any way. And so, you know, from a truly revolutionary point of view, she might seem a little frustrating because she wasn't, she was involved in the settlement movement, but she wasn't the prime mover of it. But she, it's hard work to make your peace when you're found in a middle position like that. And she was more effective as a person, I think, over the course of her life, because she found a way to move the things she cared about forward, but not to give up everything in the process.
Yesterday, we showed the film at Fitchburg State College here in Massachusetts, and a historian there pointed out something that was very interesting, was that Emily Green Balch, also a professor here and later winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, was fired in 1919 during the time of the Palmer raids for her political views. So it wasn't completely safe to have the kind of views that Vida Scudder or Bates and others had, even here.
Right. I think we're at our time, and I know you want to get over to the tent and have those Wellesley desserts that I've been hearing about. Never have experienced myself. But thank you very much for coming to our session, and please enjoy the rest of this beautiful fall afternoon.